Right before recording this introduction to the episode, something happened that every high-performing woman would recognize instantly. I got an email from a salesperson who had already sent me a long pitch followed by a review of my podcast. I appreciated the information, and I responded politely, clearly, and professionally. And I told him, hey, I have certain priorities. This is not my priority. Thank you very much. I'll reach out to you when it makes sense for me. And right now, I don't need any more input. That message that I sent should have closed the conversation. But a few hours later, he pops back into my inbox with I appreciate how open you are to hearing other perspectives. You are open to different perspectives, aren't you? And here's what's fascinating. The moment I read it, my entire nervous system reacted. My shoulders tightened up, my breath got shallow, my brain shifted from focused to irritated in half a second. It was such a tiny little message, but it carried that familiar energy, the energy of someone trying to bypass a boundary I'd already set. I said no. The energy of someone treating my no like an invitation to push harder. The energy of someone trying to hook my attention, trigger a reaction, and pull me into the conversation that I did not consent to. And in that moment, I had this flash of clarity. You know, the kind that makes you literally smile at your screen. And I thought, I know exactly what you are. You're an amygdala vampire, because that's exactly what they do, right? They poke at your amygdala, the fear and urgency center of your brain, just enough to throw you off balance. They feed on your time, your emotional bandwidth, and your mental energy. And here's the trap. It's so easy to get pulled in, especially for women who are used to being responsible, responsive, high-performing, and considerate. So this time, instead of replying, explaining, trying to be more clear, or to be nice, I just said, screw it. I blocked him. Instantly, my whole system exhaled. Thank God. And that moment made me realize how often many of us deal with these tiny micro interactions at work, at home, in meetings, and in our inbox that hijack our calm without us even realizing it. So in today's episode, we're talking exactly about that. How to recognize the people and the pressures that poke at your amygdala. How to stop feeding the vampires that steal your attention and your energy and your time. And how to reclaim your mental space before anything else gets drained. Welcome to UnCeiling You, the podcast for high-performing women who are done with white-knuckling their way through success and are ready to lead with calm, clarity, and strong boundaries. I'm your host, Dr. Natalie Luke. Today's conversation is all about the power of saying no, holding your ground, and building a career and a life that actually fits you, not somebody else's idea of success. My guest is Stacie Shifflett, best-selling author, founder, and CEO of Modern Consciousness, and a woman who has repeatedly rewritten the rules in rooms where she was never supposed to have power. In this episode, Stacie shares how she turned down multiple offers and ended up having a role created on her terms so that she could keep her freedom, her farm, and her time with her son. How she helped lead a $50 million acquisition without a college degree and without putting in her own capital, simply by backing her expertise and refusing to underestimate herself. What she did when the new CEO literally left her off the organization chart, and how she stood in her value instead of shrinking. This is a conversation about boundaries that aren't just no, but clear invitations for the right opportunities, the right people, and the right next chapter. So if you've ever felt underestimated, dismissed, or pressured to say yes when every part of you was screaming, no, this episode is for you. Let's dig in. Thank you so much, Stacie, for being on UnCeiling You. I'm really looking forward to dissecting your story and getting to the mindsets that really help us build boundaries. And sometimes saying no is the boldest career move you can make. Your story is so compelling. You turned down multiple offers from Booz Allen, even telling them the culture was not a fit for you. And most people would have folded. What gave you the courage to say no?
Well, at that time in my life, I was doing some part-time consulting work. I had a farm. I was actually raising llamas. I've done so many different things. And my son was pretty young. And, I was working, I think, at Department of Labor, and they were on the same contract, or not the same contract, but they had a contract in the same office. And I was a subject matter expert in my field. And they started recruiting, and I just kept saying no. And I did. I finally looked at them one day and said, I do not fit your corporate profile. And I never will, right? I'm not interested in it. I'm not interested in climbing your ladder. I'm just, I've got a llama farm. If I want to take 3 weeks off to groom my big fluffy llamas and drive them to Oklahoma City for a show, I'm going to take that time off. If I want to spend time with my son or he has something at school, I'm going to do that. And what was so interesting about that is, we forget that we can create boundaries and that we don't have to have fear that we have to succumb to somebody else's idea of what success looks like. And they created a position for me, and they created a mechanism to hire me as an independent consultant, through a different company, not Booz Allen in particular. And it worked very, very well for both of us. I got what I wanted. They got what they wanted. They supported me. I supported them, did a fabulous job at work. And and we forget that we can do that, especially once we have a firm foundation and have built a reputation. It might be a little different in the very beginning when you're starting out, but once you have a firm foundation set and people know what to expect of you, and if they're recruiting you and want you there, or even if you have an existing job and they really, really want you to stay, there is some flexibility.
So how did you ever feel tempted to second guess, especially when they kept coming back?
I didn't. I really didn't, because I was at the farm one day. I was fortunate in that I was able to quit my job basically when my son was born. I still had calls coming in. So I wrote a few proposals for people from home and did some technical documentation and things like that. And I received a phone call one day, and, I was coming back from the barn, and it was a gentleman that had a small 8A firm in Washington, D.C., and he had heard of my reputation and wanted me to come to work for him. And I remember standing there in my barn clothes in the garage, because I was just taking off my muck boots and all of that. And I said, well, I suppose I should at least hear what you're offering me before I say no. And that's what I did. I listened and heard him out in what he wanted. And then I said, okay, I'm living at least 2 hours from DC on a decent traffic day. This is what my life looks like. And there are certain things that I need to preserve. And I think that we often forget that when we're looking at our options in our life. What do we want to release, but what do we want to preserve? And I wanted to preserve that freedom, and he allowed me to do that. There was a commuter train. I negotiated with him that I could bill my commuter train time, but I worked on that time, right? That was the time I could read documents. I could have my laptop out. I could make notes. I honestly did do that, right? And I had a very flexible schedule, and it was working with him on that contract is where I met Booz Allen. So I had already negotiated something that was working well for me, and I wanted to preserve that. So I did.
Right. That's great. So you basically built a wall, a boundary. Well, boundaries aren't really walls. They're invitations for the right opportunities. So you knew, hey, if this is going to work for me, what I want to preserve, then you in your head formulated that list. And you mentioned that you held firm to your values and ended up with the role that was created on your terms. What do you think companies really respond to when someone advocates for themselves in that way?
I think there's not just one right answer, right? There's a lot of ands, right? So I was a known subject matter expert in the field, and I had a history of delivering, and. So they were amenable, right? Not everybody is amenable, and you can walk away from somebody that's not amenable as well. And I have also done that. And that's okay. That's okay. So it's a matter of who will work with you, and wouldn't you rather work for someone? And I would reframe that to with someone. Wouldn't you rather work with someone that appreciates you and will work with you as well? It's reciprocal.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. And so it wasn't that you were being difficult, you were just being clear.
I was being honest. Those were my terms. Yeah, I was being honest about it. And I was able to do that. I built my work around that, and they had noticed when I was going to be out of the office. Now I may take some phone calls or, check some emails or what have you, but I would indeed do that. If I had a llama show coming up, I would take 3 weeks off. I just wouldn't be in the office, maybe just a little bit part-time on a conversation or what have you. But I spent that time grooming my llamas, loading all my llamas in a trailer and driving halfway across the country, going to the auction and the show and driving back. And then I went back to work when I came home.
Yeah, there you go. So you don't need a degree to be dangerous. You just need a vision, clarity, guts, follow through. And you led a $50 million acquisition without a college degree and without your own capital. And to me, this story is completely extraordinary. Walk us through from the start. How did that idea come to you, and how did you move it from concept to a closed deal?
Well, I woke up. It's a company that I knew. I had worked for that company before. It was in the space in which I was a subject matter expert. It was in federal procurement automation. And I literally woke up one morning, and this happens to me from time to time, and said, I need to call them and see if I can buy that company. And instead of telling myself, no, that was ridiculous, I made the phone call. And when I called, I was told that that was really interesting. They had just listed it with a broker, and
Mm.
I knew the management. Everybody was octogenarians except for one guy, and that's the guy that I had the closest relationship to and called, and I think he was in his 70s. So at first I was like, oh, broker, I don't really know anything about this. And I was a little disappointed, but it was the best scenario because I was naive. I had no idea what the company may have cost, none of that. So what I did was, and I was working at Booz Allen at the time, I walked into the office of someone that was much higher in the corporate structure than I was, and managed this team. And I poked my head in his office and said, because I knew he had his MBA and he had some connections in mergers and acquisitions. I knew that, and I don't have a college degree. So I popped my head in his office and said, hey, you want to go buy this company? And he said, sure. And I went back to his office the next day and stuck my head in and said the same thing. And I said, I'm serious. And at that point, he took me seriously. I have goosebumps as I'm telling you this story.
Mm.
And yeah, so he had information that I didn't have. I had a lot of information that he didn't have, right? Because I had worked so closely with these people and in this aspect of the industry for so many years. And we put together an awesome pitch deck and we started pitching it. It took 9 months. There were many times that he was like, oh my God, we'll never be able to do this. But I felt from the beginning that it was meant to happen and that it was going to happen. I never doubted it. I never listened to anybody that said I was crazy. They called us cashless investors and a few other names along the way. We didn't stop. And after 9 months, the people that we pitched the deal to, almost everybody wanted in. And one of the top investment firms in the country, if not in the world, ended up doing the deal and put up the cash and bought the company. And with that, he and I got pretty lucrative employment contracts guaranteeing our positions in the firm. And that's a whole nother story I could share with you. And we got sweat equity. There was a buyout agreement that when they flipped the business, that we had the option to cash out. And when they flipped, I cashed out. Also because of boundaries.
All right. So let's move into that next story of the acquisition happened. You're now an employee, what happened next?
Well, the first thing that happened is that they brought in a CEO that had experience running a company of that size because he nor I did not. He was going to be the chief operating officer, and I was vice president of services because that's what I excelled at, was going in on these large scale implementations, including financial management system integrations. And that's what I did. I was boots on the ground and did it really, really, really well. So we walk into this first meeting with this new CEO, and he's got an organization chart laid out on the desk. And I'm looking at it and I go, and this is honest to God, I said, I don't see my name there. And he said, yeah, I don't know what to do with you. And I learned later that it was because I didn't have a degree, and I was not normal in his eyes, right? I was a little bit revolutionary. And I looked at him. Now the partner that I brought into this deal with me didn't say a word.
Didn't have your back.
And I looked at this gentleman and I said, you know what? I have two things to tell you. First of all, you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for me, because all of this was my idea. And secondly, you know exactly where I belong on that organization chart because I have an employment contract. And I got up and walked out. And my partner came after me. I was at the elevator and he came after me and said, you can't talk to him that way. And I looked at him and I said, what do you mean I can't talk to him that way? He said, well, he's our new boss. And I said, oh, no. I said, no. What would you have done if he left you off the organization chart? And oh, by the way, had he done that, I would have had your back and you didn't have mine. And so that's how it kind of started. And then I ran my department and they were focused on software and the technology aspects of some of these things. And I did that for quite a bit of time, racking up a great amount of success. I can't tell you how many millions of dollars worth of winning proposals that I wrote, so on and so forth. And at one point in time, they decided that they wanted to just be a software company and do away with services. And anyway, so I was really not feeling supported.
Yeah.
And I wasn't being supported. Now, I was their pinch hitter. I was the one that went out and started these massive projects, would get the teams all set up, do all the business process re-engineering, all the data mapping, all of this stuff. And then the team would stay behind and execute, and I would go to the next project.
Right.
Walked into work one day and they said, you're really not going to like this, but we have a huge problem. And it was at the Department of Homeland Security. And we need you to go in and fix it. And what that meant, that to me, that also meant I was commuting back to Washington, D.C. every single day versus the office that was out by Dulles Airport. So it was a big change for me. Nobody consulted with me. And okay, I went and did it. But the relationships were really fraying. And so when they flipped the company, they said, okay, great. It's my opportunity to get out. I'm going to take my money and get out. And that's when they started courting me again, going, no, we really have to present a unified management team, and we need you, and this and that and everything else. And I essentially said, it's too late for that. You should have thought of that before. Because it wasn't that I wasn't doing a good job. It wasn't that I wasn't performing. The gentleman really had an issue that I did not have this huge degree. But anyway, again, I said no, and I cashed out very lucratively and walked away from it.
So he was basically dismissing you. And what do you say to women who feel dismissed and underestimated?
I've never really allowed that for the most part. And I've gotten better. Clearly younger, when I was very young, I still didn't allow that. Really? Now I've learned a lot more, and I've got more eloquent about it and a little more confident in speaking up, for myself over the years. But even when I was very young, I had a lot of confidence, and I just really didn't allow that to happen. I stood up for myself. Now I produced, right? I backed it up. So you don't have to tolerate that.
So first step is you didn't definitely let it soak in. And then you're able to stand up and say no.
Yeah, we have to be able to say no, especially when it's out of alignment with our values. Right. Because when we're living out of alignment with our values over time, we become miserable people. And, that's when people often get into trouble. And that's it. And, because the frustration builds and the anxiety builds, and that begins to spill out into everything in your life. And why? It doesn't have to be that way, right? There are always other opportunities. You can find people that will appreciate you. And sometimes you just need to rebalance and figure out, okay, is this really creating the outcomes I want in my life? Is this really fulfilling me in the ways that I need to be fulfilled in all aspects of my life? Is it supporting all aspects of my life and the outcomes that I desire, or is it not? And if it's not, that's when you start to evaluate what to do differently.
Right.
And you should evaluate that routinely anyway, right? Just to make sure everything stays on track.
It stays on track. It's true to you. It's all in alignment. So, from pioneering early tech, raising llamas, to running a hospitality business, to launching modern consciousness, you've really reinvented yourself. And that's the message you're sharing with us is, hey, there's always other opportunities. And you've done it again and again. What is your approach for starting over?
I'm generally just very passionate about it. I have ideas, even when I was young, barely aged into working into a bar. I remember walking into one day, and I had been in Washington, D.C., and I was now out in rural Virginia. And I walked in and said, "Hey, I know your business." And I was 20 something, right? I know your menu, and I'm looking at your prices, and I've been in here before, and you're leaving money on the table. You can charge more. We can redo this to charge more and increase your profitability. And it wasn't that I was some business whiz. It's just that's the idea that was the intuition that I got. That was the idea that I had. And I was bold enough to walk in and say it. And I was hired on the spot. And I did indeed do just that.
So, the bar business did increase their prices. Did they also increase their profitability?
Yes. Yes,
That's
he did.
awesome.
Yes.
So you figured out it was time to pivot, and there's many times you've already described all the different times that you've recognized when it's time to pivot. How do you know it's time to pivot?
For me, it's a pretty deep knowing most of the time. And when I have those deep internal knowings, I take action. It's what I call right action, right? So I take action on that to the best of my ability to be able to make that my reality. My construction company was a little bit different. After I had the software company, I opened a framing carpentry company in Washington, D.C., and we built 4 and 5-story apartment buildings. I had a great team. Hired somebody to manage that for me. I was tiring of it. There were many different things that affected that, right? I had a special certification in Washington, D.C. I never operated under woman owned, but I had to hire D.C. residents that fit a particular demographic, we'll say. That didn't want to work. There were a lot of challenges there. I would spend the money and the time and the effort. We had to have somebody. We primarily did management, but I had to have somebody in an apprenticeship program. And here's an example of that. So we would finally think we found someone, and I would pay for it, and they wouldn't show up. And then the DC government would turn around and fine me for not having someone in the apprenticeship program. And I'd be like, you've got to be kidding me, right? It's not my fault they didn't show up. And we'd start the process again. So there was a lot of that in dealing with this particular program. Nobody wanted to buy the business because they didn't want to deal with the DC government, and I couldn't blame them. I was looking at we did primarily supervision, right? And then we subcontracted out most of the labor. We did build and, supply and build. So we had all the materials and all that stuff. I thought about pivoting and getting rid of that certification, but that would put me competing in other areas, right? With the bigger companies. That didn't sound very appealing to me. And I thought about pivoting into maybe a different sort of workspace with that company. And I finally just decided that none of that was really working out for me. And I made the decision to close it, to just stop. Now what I did was I quit bidding. I was like, okay, this is not for me anymore. I want out of this. So at that level, I shifted my goal to ensuring that all of my guys had work. And do you know, not one person left that company. Not one person left me. So they knew that we were working to close out the jobs that I had open. it's out of integrity for me to just walk out of the situation. So we finished all of our contracts. And as we finished contracts, people would transition over to the other, these other positions that I had found for them. Not one person, I'll reiterate, that left. It is almost unheard of for people to not walk out because they know you're closing the company and they may not have a job.
Right.
And yeah, I just decided to say no. I had it and I wanted out. It was a lucrative company. It was doing well. I was making awesome money. I had a lot of freedom. But it wasn't serving me anymore, and it wasn't making me happy anymore, and I wanted out. So I said no and made the decision to close it. I did try to sell. Nobody wanted to be in that space. They were very, very afraid of the remaining contracts that I had, and they didn't realize that they could just transition themselves into their bigger businesses because some of them already had, carpentry businesses and whatnot. So I just walked away.
And I really love the fact that you recognized the need of your employees and said, hey, look, I'm going to help you find that next position. I mean, it shows such strong integrity. And then also it goes along with your values.
Yes, it did. And they stayed. They stayed. A few of them were not picked up in the end, even though there were some promises to do so. But you know what? I had one of them call me after and let me know that. But what he said is that actually ended up being the best situation for him because he had some things with family and whatnot going on at home, and he got unemployment and took off for a while. So even the one where the promise to me was broken, right? Because they had promised to take my people. That's what I was met with was, acceptance and compassion from those few people that were not picked up.
Oh, that's nice. So what inspired you to launch Modern Consciousness and your treasure map to joy?
Modern consciousness came to me through meditation. After my divorce, I was married for 28 years and my marriage imploded. And it was after that, it was probably a couple of years after that, that I really decided life just isn't going to organically recreate itself for you. You have always had to create your own opportunities and your own life. And at that point, I had done a great deal of healing. I wasn't completely healed by any means. 28 years is a long time to be married. So I really threw myself into personal development work. And I learned an awful lot. So through that period was granted this vision for this company, Modern Consciousness, and, the aspects of modern consciousness, and all these ideas just kept coming to me. So what I did was I started collecting it all. And, I'm a writer and an analyst. So I started collecting and I started doing some business analysis on this industry and, all of that kind of stuff. But I kept resisting. I just kept saying no. I'm like, no, I am not your girl. I don't want to start another company. At 65 years old, I just, I was like, no. And the idea was very persistent. It would not leave me alone. It was becoming an obsession. And I was sitting in this spot one day and I'm like, I'm going to go meditate, and I'm like, okay, fine. What do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? You're not leaving me alone. What do you want me to do? And I got one word, which was right. I said, okay, I've written everything down. I have the craziest conversations with the creator sometimes with the universe. I said, all right, I've written everything but I don't know what you want me to write, but I surrender. And I literally said the words out loud. I surrender. Okay. And within an hour, I had a text message from someone that said, hey, I've got a friend of mine that's a publisher in Canada. She's doing a collaboration book with Les Brown. She has a chapter open in it. Would you like to join the project?
Oh, wow.
At which point I rolled my eyes to the sky because I had to say yes, which meant I also had to write a very big check. And it was through doing the chapter in that book that I realized that I could begin formulating my company and launch the company along with the book. So that's what I set about doing. And it's been my passion ever since. But that's how it came to be.
I find that story fascinating because so often we get these inspired thoughts that are outside of ourselves that we know is not coming from inside ourselves that we have to pay attention to. And as you're talking about everything that you've done, it seems that you really live from that intuition part of you.
It served me really well over the years. The thing is, you have to be quiet to hear that voice. Now, I wasn't as quiet as I am today, back then, but I would still have these very profound ideas that I would take action on. Right. It was just such a powerful idea. It was a powerful idea to walk into that bar at 20 some odd years old and, get the manager and say, hey, it was a powerful idea to do the acquisition of the software company. And so it's important to pay attention to those times and to sort out what it is, because we have to discern between our ideas and ideas that we are perhaps gifted with. I do remember reading this. These ideas are out here floating around, and they are meant for someone to pick them up and to execute against them. And if it comes to you and you ignore it, it will find its way to someone else that will take the ball and run with it.
So I love that particular topic because for me, being a scientist, okay, let's just test. Is this my voice or is this a voice that is coming from the consciousness God? Let's just write it down and test it out and see what happens when I act on this versus something else. I love having you on the show. And now we're going to move to the insider group questions. So before we move to those, help people know where to find you and where to find all your programs.
Yes, everything about me, including links to my social, and I've got a couple of free gifts out there as well, are on my website, modernconsciousness.com.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So here are the 5 questions for the insider group. What was the scariest moment during the 50 million acquisition process, and how did you talk yourself through it privately?
Let's see. I actually think the scariest moment was when he left me off of the organization chart and we had done the deal by then. I was very confident throughout the process of the acquisition. It was a little scary going in and pitching the business. But on the other side of that, I had already done so much in support of marketing that particular company's software when I used to work with them that I was very confident about that. So I think probably the scariest part for me was when he left me off the organization chart, and I thought, what the heck? That was the scariest. And I've already shared with you how I dealt with that. I mean, I had a contract and I reminded him of that.
Yeah, good for you.
Now, I had no idea what it was going to be like at that point when I got on the inside. But as I said, once I got in, I focused on what I was hired to do and they were focused on other things. So they just let me run with it.
Yeah.
And I did.
So have you ever deeply regretted saying no to something? And what did it teach you about the timing and intuition?
So I have a house on Siesta Key in Sarasota, Florida, right? So on the Gulf Coast here. And this has been a really interesting experience for me. And while I did call a realtor while the market was at its peak, I called my realtor and said, hey, what do you think I could sell this place for? Because I knew that I wouldn't be here forever, right? It's not my forever home. It's not my agent place home, if you will. But I didn't really pursue it because I had no inspiration of what to do next. My house flooded last year. I was just finishing a major repair. They had just laid new floors and Helene hit and the house flooded. So I was displaced from my home for 9 months. But I still was showered in blessings. So I managed to stay very, very positive and focus on the things I was grateful for. And there were many, many things to be grateful for me in that situation. I had just a couple inches in the house. Other people had 3 to 5 feet. I had a contractor here that I got first dibs on. I had another home to go live in because I have a home in Virginia. And I'm at the point now with this house, and I actually have a realtor coming tomorrow to begin exploring selling it. I still don't have an inclination of what to do next. And I usually sort of know. It's just for me. And it's not just it's not just the weather, but when I look at it, I'm a project manager and analyst at heart, right? So when I start to look at the risk benefit, the risks are starting to outweigh the benefits. This house has just been, it has filled my soul to be here. I mean, even the renovations I've done and so on and so forth. Do I kind of wish I had maybe sold it back when the market was at its peak? Probably. But that's okay. Everything's divinely timed. Right now when I ask what's, there's a lot of uncertainty and what can I be certain about? And all I'm told is you'll know when you know. And so I'm just having to lean in and trust that.
Good for you. So, what beliefs about success have you had to dismantle as a woman without a degree climbing into high stakes rooms?
I came up in the corporate world, the 80s and 90s and, what have you. So I faced things that every other woman faced, but I didn't lean into any of that in feeling victimized, right? If you feel like you are a victim, that is a very unhealthy place to be. It's very low resonating energy. And I would have to say that I really never felt victimized. I was laid off from a company at one time. It was, I was the right hand person to the vice president that managed the acquisition and contracting division of that company. They did software in that area as well. And at the last minute, I was switched to the list to be laid off. They were downsizing, and I was switched to be laid off because of. It wasn't because I was a woman. And frankly, it was because of my skin color, if I'm to be perfectly honest about it. And my boss didn't even know. He was livid. And they wanted to swap me out for a lower level position so that their statistics on who they kept matched a particular profile. And that's an honest story. But even then, I mean, I was shocked for sure. He was shocked. He was livid. I had to adjust to it, but it was not, I still didn't feel victimized, right? I didn't carry that with me. I remember the experience, but again, at that point, I had already been in that space for a while and had started to build a reputation. And someone knew I got laid off and called me and said, "Hey, do you want to come do this? We hear you're free." And so it opened another opportunity. And had those opportunities not presented themselves to me, if I had not gone down that path, who knows? I probably wouldn't have acquired that software company. So don't stay in a victim mindset. Deal with it, set your boundaries, keep your perspective aligned with you, and move forward.
So, along the question, and the final question is, when someone underestimates you, what's your internal mantra or script that helps you hold your power?
I guess it depends on how tightly I want to hold on to something and how passionate I am about something. And I won't be deterred. If I'm passionate about it and I feel that it is the right thing, I'm just not deterred by it.
There you go. I really appreciate having you, Stacie, on UnCeiling You. I feel you are a brave example of what we should be looking at when we are facing our own times when we have to set a boundary, and that it's possible to have your boundaries and move forward in your space. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me.
If there's one thing I hope you're walking away with from this conversation, it's this. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to build a career and a life around what you want to preserve, not just what you're willing to sacrifice. Stacie showed what it looks like to turn down big name offers when the culture doesn't fit. Negotiate work on your terms, not as a favor, but as a standard. Walk away from lucrative roles, even whole companies, when they're no longer aligned. And trust your own knowing even when other people don't get it yet. Boundaries aren't walls, they're invitations for the right work, the right people, and the right next chapter. And the more you respect your own boundaries, the more bandwidth you get back. Emotional, mental, and creative. If this episode resonated, I'd love for you to share it with another high-performing woman who needs a reminder that she's allowed to hold her line. And if you're craving more micro moments of calm in your day, I'm creating a set of Gaining Calm in 3-minute cards, simple prompts and resets you can use between meetings, before tough conversations, or anytime your amygdala starts buzzing. If you want early access, DM me the word CALM, CLAM, and I'll send them to you as soon as they are ready. Thank you so much for listening to UnCeiling You. I'm your host, Dr. Natalie Luke. So take a breath and trust your no. And I'll see you in the next episode.